I'm Dean Cifola, and this is the Azure Academy. In our last video in our migration series, we covered a single VM and how we could protect that in Azure. Today, we want to scale that up and go to multiple VMs. And so let's go over to the Azure portal. So here I've got a couple of resource groups, and this one is our ASR demo for today. And we have in here a 3-tiered application plus a jump server, and that is on a virtual network that is in the same resource group. And this is on the 192.168 address space, and there are currently no peers. So going back to this ASR demo DR resource group, so we have our West US 2 is our primary region. Over in East US 2 is where we're going to do our DR, and I've got another virtual network stood up there, and that is on a different address space, 172.16, and I've got the subnets aligned so that everything is going to look the same, just in a different address space. So step one, we need to create ourselves a recovery services vault. Add a backup and site recovery. We hit create, and we've got to give it a name, and we'll hit create, and that'll be done in a second. So first thing we're going to do is go under the site recovery infrastructure, and we're going to set up some network mappings. So we'll hit plus on network mappings, and then we want to know where the source subscription and destination subscriptions are, what regions they're in, the particular model, which hopefully you are all using Resource Manager now, no more using Classic, and then select the particular networks that we're going to connect together. So we're going to select the source region, which is West US 2, and then the destination region of East US 2, and here is our VNet and our ASR VNet. Okay, that's how you create a network map. All right, so that step has finished. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that if you plan on doing replication and then reverse replication, so you want to fail over to the other region, but you also want to fail back, then we would need another mapping in here that's going to reverse this. So let's add that as well. Okay, so we're just doing these same steps in reverse, and we'll hit OK. All right, so now we've got our mapping set up. Now we also need to create a replication policy, and the policy is going to dictate how much we're sending data, what kind of snapshot frequency are we doing. So the defaults here are for 24 hours and for 4 hours. So you can give it a name, whatever you like. Okay, and then set those as you need to for your specific applications and hit OK. So if you're just doing a Azure to Azure DR plan, which is what we're focused on today, that's it. We're ready to go. So we can hit plus replicate over here or go into our replicated items. So let's do a little of both. So we're going to pick our source as Azure versus on-prem, and our source location is in West US 2 with, again, Resource Manager. And then you pick your appropriate subscription and resource group and hit OK, and it'll discover what VMs you have. And so it found all of my VMs. In this case, I'm just going to add one, which will be my jump server, and hit OK. And now we come to the configure screen. So let me make this a little bigger. So the configuration here is going to give us the target resource group network, where is the stashed storage account, how are we doing our disk replication, availability sets, and what policy we're going to use and how we're managing any extensions. So I'm going to hit customize. And then this is where you can also change if you're going to go to a different subscription. So let's go into this customization for the details of this VM. And so it's already got our resource group marked out as well as our network, and then we've got the particulars around the VM itself. So source is currently a premium SSD, and then we're going to be able to choose how we're going to replicate that over. So standard HDD, premium SSD, standard SSD. I'm just going to have it go to standard, and then you have to select a cache storage account. Now remember, the cache storage account exists in the resource group that you're failing over to, but it will be located in the same region where the source systems are, in this case, West US 2. And that's because we're going to replicate this disk into this storage account, and then from this storage account over to the disaster recovery region. Okay, and then we need to choose if we're going to use availability zones or sets as we do this failover. So I'm going to pick a zone, and we'll hit OK. And then you can customize down here for your particular policies. If you have multiples, you can create new ones, and also you can set VM consistency, which is something that we'll get into a little bit later, so we'll come back to that. And then down here is the extensions. So if your systems have extensions today, when we build the replicated VM, they will not have extensions on them. So this may or may not be a problem depending on what extensions you're using. For example, if you used a custom script configuration to install some script function, role, service, etc., then not a problem. You don't need this because those are one-time run events. However, if you have an extension that requires to be there constantly or run every time it boot up, or something like a antivirus, a monitoring extension, a security profile, a external disk extension tool, then we need some way when we bring up that VM in the other region to add that extension to it. And that's what this service does here. So if we choose allow ASR to manage, then this is going to spin up for us a automation account that's going to manage the extension, which is what I'm going to do. And that's going to be the name of the account. So we'll hit create target resources, and that'll create our Azure automation account as well as enable the extensions on our jump server VM to be able to start protecting it. Okay, those settings have all been prepared, and now we can hit the enable replication button, and that VM is now going to be protected. So let's now go to replicated items, and we're going to hit plus replicate and just repeat again for the other VMs. So you can see the experience is identical, but now I'm going to pick multiple VMs at once and hit OK. And then we're back to the customizations. So let's go to customize. And then again, you can change the particulars on your disk layouts. So I'm going to set my web server to have a hard drive, and we've already done standard on the other one, so I'll leave these two as premium. And then you can pick what availability sets or zones you want. So I'll put all these guys into zone 1. Now, of course, you want to make sure that your app is spread out across multiple zones. That's what the purpose of them is. But in this case, since I only have one VM per tier in the application, this isn't really a big deal. So if you had multiple web servers, you want to have some in zone 1, some in zone 2, etc. So that way you can make them highly available. And we'll hit OK here. And going back to our extension, we know that we're going to allow ASR to manage it. So I will hit create target resources, and we'll hit enable replication. And if we go back to the original resource group and we go to one of our VMs, say our jump server, and we go to disaster recovery in the blade, we can see that that protection is already being enabled, and there are no errors at this point, no issues at this point. And so we're doing the initial setup and replication. So that's good. So let's go back to our vault. And now if we go under site recovery, we can see that we've got 4 virtual machines, and we've got our maps set up here. So our 4 machines going to our cache storage account, over the region to the disaster recovery region to the vault. That's good, and they are in progress. So we could look at the state of what's going on if we look at the site recovery jobs, which are down here in monitoring. And we can see that we have our replication being enabled on our VMs. So here's our jump server, currently installing the mobility service agent, and then we're going to set up our replication, do our replication, and then provide the continuous updates of what's going on the target system. So we are off to the races. All right, so while that is going on, let's go to recovery plans. So the recovery plan is the order of operation when you're going to do the failover. So let's give this a name of ASR demo recovery plan, so that way we know which vault it relates to and what's going on. We pick our source as WestUS2, and then of course resource manager, and then we select our items. So here's our different VMs. Now, when you create a recovery plan, that plan could involve one or multiple systems. So think about it like this. The plan is we have to get out of region 1 and go to region 2. When we do, what are the systems and what are their dependencies, and how do they have to be moved and in what order? We need our jump server in order to get into our environment, so we need that guy. And then, of course, we need our application servers. Now, if you had other systems that were in that particular region that you had dependencies on, Active Directory, DNS, firewall appliances, security stack, monitoring tools, etc., then you may want to have those as part of this recovery plan, or you may want multiple recovery plans so that you can have a recovery plan for what's going on with AD, DNS, and the firewall appliances, all those shared services, and then another one for each application that you have. Okay, so that way you can choose to fail over a single application, the whole central services, move everything. You can just figure that out as to what your DR recovery plans are so that you know the order of operations and what pieces all should move as one. So let's hit OK. and we'll hit OK on the recovery plan. So that's the basic recovery plan. Now we're going to open it and we're going to tweak this plan. So we're going to customize it for our needs. So let's hit customize. And the first thing that we can see is we have all of our VMs in a single group. Now we really need at least 2 groups because our jump server is not part of our application. So we know that that has to come up before everything else. Right now, if we kick this off, everybody would come up at the same time. That's usually not good for an application. Usually need your database to come online first, then your app tier, then your web tier. So let's create some groups. Okay, so we'll have our VM, our jump server in group 1, and then we need group 2 to be our database. So let's click on our database server here, and we'll hit change group, move him to group 2. And then our application server goes to group 3. Then our web server goes to group 4. Okay, so now the order of operations. Bring up the jump server, then the database, then the app, then the web. Okay. Now, again, one of the things that we can do is we can add pre and post scripting. So if we go to the group here, we can hit a pre-action or a post-action. So pre-action could be we want a manual step. In this case, manual action to verify that we're supposed to start a DR, talk to the director, make sure that we're really supposed to do this. And we want this as a manual action, so that way if someone goes into the action plan and they kick it off and they do a failover, that the very first thing it's going to do is stop. And it's going to verify, are you sure that you want to do this? So this is always a good first step just to keep yourself safe. So we'll hit OK to that. The rest of the pre and post actions here, so let's add another one, but let's add it for group 2. So we'll add a pre-action, and this one will be a scripted action. Now when you do a scripted action, it has to use a automation account. Now if you don't have a particular script or runbook already staged in your account, you'd have to create those before you can execute them here. So as you can see, I don't have any runbooks in that account or in this one that ASR stood up for me automatically. So in this automation account, however, I do have some runbooks. Now these are just the tutorial ones. So I could just select this one if that was a valid runbook for me, and then give it some kind of name, and then go ahead and hit OK. And that runbook process would run before this database server would come online. Okay, so that's the benefit of those. One other thing that I'll call out here is with our database servers. Databases usually have some kind of replication technology of their own. When something has its own replication technology, it is recommended, normally speaking, to have that thing's replication technology execute its replication and disaster recovery strategy, because it's native to the app. It was designed by the developer to do that, and so that would be the best tool for the job. So a general recommendation, if you're going to do something like a SQL server and you want it to be highly available, you would use something like a stretch cluster, SQL always on availability group, and you would want to have that SQL server use its own native functionality to do the failover. So in those kind of cases, you have a SQL always on availability group, you would not add your SQL server into this plan, other than perhaps to execute the command against the SQL server as a runbook automation to initiate failover from server 1 to server 2. Okay, so we could add that as a particular runbook item to your group. Now that would mean in that case that the database server would not be here. We would not protect the database server. We would let SQL always on availability groups protect the database. Okay, so they're replicating to each other anyway. All that needs to happen is we need to fail over from the primary to the secondary node, and we can do that with an automation runbook. Okay, so once that database is online and whatever scripting process you need to fail it over from system 1 to system 2, your database is now online, our jump server is online, presumably all of our other centralized services are as well, better dependencies, Active Directory, firewall, DNS, etc. Now our application server will come online. If that needs any kind of scripting automation, do that. And then our web server, and now our application should be up and running. Do you need any DNS repointing? Do you have to go into your Azure DNS zone or wherever you're hosting DNS to do a DNS failover? That could be scripted, and you could have the script run here, but you may have to do that somewhere else if it's somewhere like, I don't know, GoDaddy that doesn't perhaps have a scriptable interface. Okay, and once you do all these things, then theoretically, you've done a full failover, your app is up and running in the other region, and you're good to go. So we'll hit OK and hit save, and now we've customized our recovery plan. So we just have our pre-step manual action for group 1, and nothing else happening here. So let's close that screen. And now the only other thing you can do is your failover or your test, but we have to wait to do that until the rest of our jobs are finished. So it looks like all of those steps have completed, and our systems are currently healthy and not yet synchronized. So we need to now wait for the synchronization. This is that initial replication step to complete. Once that has happened, then we'll be good to go. Okay, so initial replication has been completed. So once we have the initial replication finished, then we'll have a status of protected and you'll be healthy. And then the next thing to do is do a test failover. So we've never done a test on the system, and it's pointing that out as a warning so that you test and verify. Not only have you checked the box, yes, we have DR, but you actually test it, because DR that doesn't work is worthless. Okay, so we want to go back to our vault. Now we can kick this off by going to our recovery plans. And inside the recovery plan, we can kick off our test, or we can do a full failover. But we're just going to do the test part here. Okay, and when we do, we have to pick which RTO point we want. Now, in this case, we've only got one because we've just done our initial, and we're going to select our particular network. And it's recommending, of course, that this is different from our production network, which of course it is. Our regular network was on 192.168. Our DR network is 172, so they will not collide with each other. And we hit OK. And under the notification, we see that the test failover is now in progress. We passed our prereq checks, and now we're doing our initial failover testing. And so each one of these groups is going to execute in order and do any kind of pre-steps, post-steps, etc. that are required. So what are we doing in this section here as we're preparing this recovery plan? Well, if we go back to our resource groups, we can see now that we have a new resource group called ASR Demo ASR. And in here is where all of our disks are stored. And you can see that we've got one for each of our VMs, and now we also have one that's a test. So we have our replicas and we have a test. And that's because when we do a test, we basically duplicate the replicated disk. So replication is still happening from the primary region to our DR region. But we also have these separate disks that we can spin up separate VMs isolated from the originals so that we can bring them up in a test bubble and validate that everything actually still works. So going back to our job here, we can see that we have now completed that step. So the disks have now been duplicated for the test. And now we have our user input required, because this was a manual action that we had set up. So we click on our ellipse here and we go to complete our manual action, which was be sure you talk to the director. Mr. Director, are you sure that we should do this? Yes. Okay, so you put in your notes, we check the box that our manual action is complete, and we hit OK. And that'll kick off the next step in the process, which is group 1, get our jump server up and running, and then database, app server, etc. Our test failover process has completed successfully. And if we look at our resource group, yep, sure looks like everything came up in the proper order. So everything's up and running. Now let's tear the test down. So we go back to our vault under the recovery plans, and we're going to now clean up the test failover. Just a simple push of a button. You make any notes. Test is 100% good. You check the box and hit OK. And now all the test VMs will be destroyed, as well as the test disks that were created, all the while still replicating from the original systems over to the replica disks. And we can also look at this under the jobs. Okay, so the test cleanup has been done, and if we go back to the resource group, yep, everything is gone except for our initial replica disks. So now that that's done, so let's go back to our plan again, and under more here, we have the full failover, so let's kick that off. And as you'll see, this will be pretty much exactly like how we did the initial. but it's going to do a shutdown of the initial VM, so it won't be destroying the initials. And the other thing to point out here is that we have a change direction button. And this is when you want to go into the failover plan and say, okay, now I need to fail back. I need to go from my DR region back to the primary region. So now we can execute that with just a simple change direction button, which is nice. And again, we're going to use our lowest RTO for this and shut down our VMs as we begin the process. So this one will take slightly longer than the test did because we have to wait for the shutdown to happen. So let's go back to our job. Okay, and just like in our test, we are at the manual input. So we'll click on the ellipse again and complete our manual action. Make sure you talk to the director. Jim said go, check the box, hit OK, and now the rest of the process will proceed. Okay, so our full failover has completed successfully. If we go back to our recovery plan, so let's walk through the commit phase. Once you commit, you cannot change the recovery point of the machine. Yes, I'm sure in this case, so I hit OK. All right, and that starts a commit process. Okay, so we can see that in the recovery job and going through and completing that commit. As you can see, it doesn't take very long. Okay, so the commit is done, and that was successful. So inside the plan, we're going to now go into reprotecting. So the reprotect is, now that we've done the full failover and we're in that disaster recovery region, is the plan to stay there forever? Then what you probably want to do is set up the recovery plan again so that you can fail over to another region. And this is basically kind of repeating the process. Okay, and in our notification, we see that we are reprotecting the virtual machines. And the reason that we're doing that is because once you do the commit, then basically you're removing them from being protected items. And then once that is done, you'll be ready to do your testing and do your failovers again in the future. So I hope that you've enjoyed this look at how to do ASR in Azure to Azure scenarios to do a multi-tiered application. Give our video a like. Make sure that you subscribe to the Azure Academy. A new video comes out roughly once a week. And please give us some comments below. Let us know what you're interested in or challenges that you're facing so that we can help you all better. And thanks very much, everyone in our community here. We've gone over 500 subscribers on the Azure Academy. Thanks all to you guys for sticking with us through all of this, and definitely give us some comments. Let you know what you want to see in the future. Happy learning.